Welcome to Mission Majjhima, Ajahn. Ajahn, so tell us about Majjhima Nikaya 83, the Makhādeva Sutta.
Yeah, so in this sutta, like Majjhima 81, the Gatikara Sutta, we find the Buddha giving a jataka, or a former life story. So the Buddha smiles, like in that one, and Ananda says, Buddhas, Tathagatas do not smile without a reason, so why are you smiling? And this is the occasion that the Buddha takes to tell this past life story of a great king named Makhādeva. And Makhādeva was a great king who was very observant, a very, very good person, and kept the uposatha, these holy days, had a Sabbath where he would practice extra diligently. At some point, he advises his barber that once the barber notices that he's got any gray hairs, to tell the king, and the king will then go forth, will then pass along his rulership, the kingship, to the next generation. So Makhādeva, the king, continues to rule righteously, and then his barber lets him know, okay, finds a gray hair, and then, as he had said he would, he gives up his kingdom to his son and goes off, renounces, and practices the 4 brahmavihāras of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, and then is reborn in the Brahma realm. And subsequently, the next 84,000 generations practice similarly, living their life in 4 quarters. So this is a traditional Indian way of conceiving of a life into 4 different phases of a life. 1/4 is as playing around as a child. 1/4 is living as a viceroy. 1/4 is living as a king. And then 1/4 is living as a renunciant. And then after these 84,000 generations, there's King Nimi, who does similarly, lives righteously, rules righteously, and then tells his barber that once he finds a gray hair, tell him, and then he'll go forth. The barber finds a gray hair. King Nimi gives this barber a whole village as a boon, and then he goes forth and gives the kingship over to his son, whose name I believe is Kalarajanaka, which literally means bucktooth person, but gives it to his son, and his son does not live righteously. And each successive generation of kings tells their progeny, the next generation, do not be the last man, do not be the last of this generation of righteous kings. But Kalarajanaka is the last man, doesn't live righteously, doesn't go forth, doesn't do this tradition. And then the Buddha, coming back to this present age, says that he was Makhādeva, this righteous king, and that even though this was a great life that all these kings are living, still that's not the practice which leads to nibbida, which is disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to clear knowing, to awakening, and to nibbana. But that the Buddha does teach a teaching that leads to these things. And what is that? That's the 8-fold noble path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So just a kind of a beautiful story. It's a beautiful story. So, Ajahn, what would you like to draw out of this kind of neat story?
I think that was a great summary of a discourse which can be quite interesting to approach as a modern person, in that this is one of those discourses which really bleeds into the cosmological and the mythological and the archetypal. It's actually quite resonant with many of the discourses in the Digha Nikaya, the longer length discourses, which are a wealth of these kind of extravagant suttas of mythological kind of portent and resonance. Sarah Shaw, who we've interviewed on the channel, has written a brilliant book called The Art of Listening about how to read the Digha Nikaya and discourses like this, and really speaking about how we can approach these discourses that seem so vast, it's hard to kind of get your head around how to hold it. For example, even the lengths of time, I think Bhante Sujato has done the math, and that lineage of 84,000 kings, each living each phase of their life for 84,000 years, adds up to 22.224 billion years, which is around twice the length of the age of the universe as it's known. So first, for me, there's a few ways of touching these. And one is understanding that in some cases, 84,000 just meant a lot. that I think there's things in the world we don't understand, including kind of these cyclic cycles of the universe, which the Buddha spoke to: infinite big bangs, big crunches, periods of universe expansion, universe contraction. And I think also, there were later insertions into the suttas. This sutta also seems very kind of appropriately framed to convert Brahmins, in the sense that it speaks about this past lineage of kings, which some of them might have recognized names of, and speaks to the limits of the practices of brahmavihāras, which lead to rebirth in the Brahma realms and were one aim of the Brahminical teachings. But the Buddha is saying that's not enough, actually. The Noble Eightfold Path is the path to full awakening. So there's a lot going on, but I'd say touch them lightly and understand that these suttas really can add a certain color and power that's quite resonant, and there's a lot of wisdom in them as well. These discourse was one of the kind of seeds of what's called the Jataka literature. In the shorter discourses, the Khuddaka Nikaya, there's 550, the commentaries, there's sort of 550 Jataka tales, which were from quite early, but there's a few in the suttas of the Buddha's past lives. And it's this, many of them were taken from other folk tales at the time, but it's actually a really wonderful literature. I mean, much of it's not from the Buddha, but if you have a child or something, these Jataka tales are just beautiful tales of virtue and giving. So really worth kind of understanding that as Buddhism matures, say in the West, there's a hunger in the human heart for these kind of storied mythological elements, and those exist in Buddhism. Another thing to note is just the beauty of the Buddhist idea of a heavenly messenger being a gray hair. Like, it's so much wisdom hidden in that simple thing. I know Longpo Sumedho talks about going to Thailand and them asking, a monk asking, what are angels like in the West? And he says, well, they have these wings and a halo and are dressed in white. And he said, what are angels, what are the heavenly messengers in Buddhism? And the monk said, well, it's old age, sickness, and death. And that these can actually call us forth to look for what is beyond old age, sickness, and death. And in that phases of life that you mentioned, that in Asian countries often, that fourth phase of life is for the spiritual pursuit. And in the West, I really think we can take this to heart and understand that there is a time where you've put down those other duties, and that's when you can direct your intention towards searching for something that's beyond the wane of what we usually look towards. And we have a rough equivalency in the West of that in buying an RV and traveling, but it's not quite the same. So, Ajahn, is there anything else you'd draw out of it?
Yeah, no, just one episode we haven't drawn out comes up in the life of King Nimi, who is such a righteous lord that the gods up in the sky, led by Sakka, are so inspired by him that Sakka, Lord of the Gods, tells Matali, his charioteer, to go down and offer King Nimi a ride, either to go to heaven or to hell. And so Matali does this, and he asks, okay, which way do you want to go? You've got this chariot, you can go down and see the results of bad actions or the results of good actions. And King Nimi says, I want to see both. So this kind of reminds us of Dante's Divine Comedy, where Virgil takes Dante to see heaven and hell. There's a great C.S. Lewis story called The Great Divorce, where there's this bus that goes down to hell and then goes back up to heaven. And yeah, just this trope of being able to see heaven and hell. And it's this theme of the heavenly messengers, Devaduta, here both in story and in practice of aging, sickness, death. And there's also a Devaduta Sutta, which adds a fourth, which is sometimes the fourth is a renunciant, a monastic is the fourth after aging, sickness, and death. Like in the story of Prince Siddhartha, before he went forth, he sees aging, sickness, and death. But in this Devaduta Sutta in the Majjhima, actually the fourth, as we'll see, is imprisonment. So you go and see what it's like in a prison, and therefore you want to act righteously. So different versions of what is a heavenly messenger.
So what is the word of the week, Ajahn?
The week is Uposatha, which is the observance day. At the time of the Buddha, it was the full moon and the new moon. And we do encourage people who can to connect with this tradition of keeping the Uposatha, sometimes translated as the holy days, and even adding 2 more in Thailand or in other Southeast Asian countries. it'll be 4 times a month. So the new moon, the full moon, and the lunar quarters, and just having that as a once a week Sabbath to keep holy, to maybe renew your vows or even up your vows. If you're keeping the 5 precepts, go to the 8, and just find a way to create a Buddhist Sabbath for yourself, an uposatha, good word.
I think Longpo Cha said, you give the world like 28 days a week, give the Buddha a few too, something like that. So, well, thanks for giving the Buddha this time, and we hope to see many of you on Zoom in a few seconds, and otherwise we'll see you next week for Majjhima Nikaya 84. Ajahn.